There's a pain, a specific ache that no one ever tells you about, a pain that doesn't show up in self-help books, that isn't mentioned in motivational videos, a pain that your friends and family simply won't understand. It's the pain of waking up while the world around you continues to sleep. If you're feeling something inexplicable inside, a deep sadness mixed with a strange, unsettling clarity, then this video has found its way to you for a reason. Eckhart Tolle, a figure whose work is increasingly relevant in our fragmented times, spent decades studying this experience, and what he discovered will completely reshape how you understand your own suffering. Most people believe that spiritual awakening is a glorious event filled with light, peace, and instant bliss. But Tolle reveals a difficult truth, a more nuanced and complex reality. The awakening often begins with pain. It's not despite the pain that you awaken. It's through it. And there are 5 specific pains, 5 distinct experiences that only those who are truly awakening can feel. 5 experiences that the world might dismiss as problems, but are, in reality, signs that something extraordinary is happening within you. Carl Jung, the renowned psychologist, often spoke of the shadow self. And perhaps this initial pain is, in part, confronting that very shadow. The first pain is perhaps the most devastating of all. The pain of existential loneliness. I'm not talking about simply being alone physically. You can be surrounded by people, at a party, at a family gathering, in the middle of a crowded city, and still feel a profound emptiness, a void that no human presence can fill. Eckhart Tolle describes this very precisely. He says that when you begin to awaken, you start to detach from complete identification with the collective consciousness, with the patterns of thought that most people share. And when that happens, you become a stranger in a world that once felt so familiar. Think of it like this. Andrew Huberman often discusses the importance of social connection. But what happens when you feel disconnected even within those connections? The conversations that once satisfied you now seem empty, hollow. The goals that everyone else pursues, money, status, material achievements, begin to lose their luster. You look at the people around you and you realize that they are operating on a different frequency than you are, not because you're better than them, but because you're seeing something that they aren't yet able to see. And that vision isolates you. You try to explain what you're feeling, but the words seem insufficient, inadequate. You mention presence, consciousness, ego, and you're met with blank stares, confusion, or worse, judgment. So you learn to remain silent. And that silence transforms into loneliness. Remember that feeling of being in a room full of people, but feeling as if there's an invisible barrier, a pane of glass, between you and everyone else. That's not your imagination. That's not clinical depression in the traditional sense. That's the experience of someone whose eyes have begun to open in a world where the majority is still asleep. And the hardest part is that you didn't choose this. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to feel different. It simply happened. And now you can no longer pretend that you don't see what you see. But here's the paradox, the crucial insight that Tolle teaches. This loneliness is not a mistake. It's a portal, a gateway, when you can no longer find complete satisfaction in superficial connections. You are forced to look inward, and it's there, in that seemingly empty space, that you discover something that has always been present, something that doesn't need external validation to exist, your own consciousness, your own presence. Tolle spent years alone, sitting on park benches, without money, without any apparent purpose. And it was in that solitude that he found a peace that no relationship had ever offered. The loneliness of awakening isn't the end of connection. It's the beginning of a deeper connection, first with yourself, and then, paradoxically, with others, in a more authentic way. Think of Ethan's visit to Olivia in Los Angeles. He felt utterly alone until he truly connected with himself. The second pain, that only the spiritually awakened experience, is the pain of hypersensitivity. Something strange happens when you begin to awaken. You feel more, much more. Emotions that previously went unnoticed now wash over you like tidal waves. The sadness of a stranger on the street affects you deeply. A news story about suffering in another continent brings you to tears. You walk into a room and you immediately sense the energy of the place. Whether it's heavy, whether it's light, whether there's tension in the air. Recent research shows that approximately 15 to 20% of the population possesses traits of highly sensitive people, and many of these individuals report more intense spiritual experiences. This is not a coincidence. Tolle explains that when you begin to disidentify from the constant noise of the mind, you become more perceptive to what's happening in the present moment. And the present moment includes not only your own feelings, but the energy of everything around you. This can be overwhelming. You feel like an emotional sponge, absorbing the pain of the world. Crowded places become exhausting. Negative people drain your energy in minutes. You need more time alone to recover. And this is often misinterpreted as being antisocial or even depressed. But hypersensitivity is not a weakness. It's an expanded capacity for perception. The problem isn't feeling too much. The problem is not knowing how to process what you feel. But wait, there's something I need to tell you about this sensitivity that goes beyond what most spiritual teachers mention. Tolle, in his book, The Power of Now, speaks about the concept of the collective pain body. It's not just your personal pain that you're feeling. You're connected to a field of pain that belongs to all of humanity, accumulated over thousands of years. Wars, traumas, ancestral sufferings, all of this exists as an energy, circulating through the collective unconscious. And when you awaken, your perception of this field amplifies dramatically. That's why sometimes you feel a sadness that doesn't feel like your own, an anguish that has no apparent origin in your life. You're not losing it. You're simply more connected to the whole. And this connection, although painful initially, is also the key to a genuine compassion that goes far beyond common empathy. Tolle offers a powerful tool for this, the practice of being the observer. Instead of identifying with the emotions that arise, you learn to observe them. You are not the sadness. You are the one who perceives the sadness. You are not the anxiety. You are the space in which the anxiety appears and disappears. This shift in perspective doesn't eliminate the sensitivity, but transforms your relationship with it. You continue feeling deeply, but you're no longer swept away by every emotional wave. You become like the ocean, capable of containing storms on the surface, while maintaining calm in the depths. The third pain is one that few have the courage to admit: the pain of disillusionment with spirituality. Yes, you heard that correctly. Many people who are awakening go through a phase of profound disillusionment with their own spiritual path. You started seeking enlightenment, permanent peace, perhaps even special powers or mystical experiences. You read the books, you did the meditations, you attended spiritual retreats, and then you discover that the ego is much more persistent than you ever imagined. Tolle talks about this with brutal honesty. He observes that the spiritual quest can become the ego's greatest project. Instead of dissolving the ego, Many spiritual practices simply create a spiritual ego, an identity based on being more conscious, more evolved, more awake than others. And when you realize this in yourself, the disillusionment is devastating. You look back and see years of searching, of effort, of believing you were progressing, and realize you were just trading one identity for another. The success seeker became the enlightenment seeker. The need for external approval became the need for spiritual validation. Material competition became competition over who is more present, more conscious, more detached. This happens to almost everyone on the spiritual path, but no one talks about it in popular books. Why? Because admitting this truth would shatter the fantasy that sells courses, retreats, and promises of enlightenment in 7 steps. But Tolle isn't interested in comforting your ego. He's interested in liberating it, and liberation often comes through the destruction of the most cherished illusions. But here's the twist that Tolle reveals. This disillusionment is precisely what needs to happen. While you're building a spiritual identity, you're still in the territory of the ego. True spirituality isn't something you achieve or become. It's something you already are. But that's obscured by all the layers of identity, including the spiritual identity. When disillusionment destroys your image of a spiritual seeker, what's left? What remains when you're no longer either the worldly person or the spiritual person? That emptiness, that not knowing who you are, is exactly where true presence can emerge. The 4th pain is the most mysterious, and perhaps the most transformative of all, the dark night of the soul. Eckhart Tolle describes this as a collapse of perceived meaning in life, an eruption of a profound sense of meaninglessness. Nothing makes sense anymore. Your goals seem empty, your beliefs crumble. You feel disconnected from everything that once gave structure to your life. According to Carl Jung, this is a critical process for individuation, stripping away the false self to reveal the authentic one. The term comes from St. John of the Cross, a Spanish mystic from the 16th century, who used it in a poem to describe the soul's journey from its bodily home to union with the divine. But you don't have to be religious to go through this experience. It happens when the structures of the mind, the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what the purpose of life is, begin to collapse. Andrew Huberman might describe this as a recalibration of your internal reward system. Tolle went through his own dark night before his awakening. He describes years of depression and anxiety, a deep identification with negative thoughts and painful emotions. On the night of his transformation, the suffering became unbearable. And it was this intolerability that triggered the separation of consciousness from its identification with form. In other words, it was the extreme pain that forced the awakening. And here's something that will seem paradoxical, but that Tolle emphasizes repeatedly. The dark night isn't a detour from the path. It is the path. It's not something that happens when you do something wrong. It's something that happens when you're ready for the next level of consciousness. Your ego interprets it as destruction. Your soul recognizes it as liberation. It's counterintuitive. Society teaches us to avoid pain at all costs. We medicate, we distract, we deny. But the dark night of the soul can't be avoided when it arrives, and trying to avoid it only prolongs the suffering. Tolle observes that it almost never happens that people awaken spiritually while they're in their comfort zone. It's precisely in the dark night, in the moment of greatest despair, that many humans experience transcendence. If you're going through this now, know that you're not losing it. You're not regressing. You're not failing. You're going through a death, the death of the ego, the death of illusions, the death of who you thought you were. And every death precedes a rebirth. The 5th pain is perhaps the most subtle, but equally profound. The pain of seeing unconsciousness in others. When you begin to awaken, you develop an ability to see patterns that were previously invisible. You notice when someone is operating purely from the ego. You see the projections, the defenses, the power games, the constant need for validation, and the most painful part, you see it in the people you love. You observe your parents repeating the same destructive patterns that have made them suffer their entire lives. You see your friends making decisions that will clearly cause more pain. You realize how society as a whole is structured to keep people asleep, distracted, consuming, competing, never stopping to question what really matters. And you can't do anything. That's the part that hurts the most. You can't force someone to awaken. You can't open someone else's eyes. Everyone needs to reach their own moment of crisis, their own dark night, their own collapse of meaning. All you can do is be present, be a living example of another way of existing, and wait. Remember that frustration you feel when you try to explain something important to someone and they simply don't get it. Multiply that by 1,000. That's what it feels like to see unconsciousness in the people you love most. You want to shake them. Shout, open your eyes. But any attempt to force awakening only creates more resistance. The ego doesn't surrender when attacked. It strengthens. Tolle warns about the danger of falling into the victim identity when observing the unconsciousness of others. It's easy to feel superior, frustrated, even angry with those who don't see what you see. But that reaction is in itself a manifestation of the ego. True compassion doesn't judge. True presence doesn't get irritated by the absence of presence in others. It simply is. Tolle tells a story about this. He was on a bus and observed a man talking on the phone aggressively, clearly dominated by the ego. His first reaction was judgment. But then he realized, who is judging? His ego was reacting to the other person's ego. At that moment, he wasn't more conscious than the man on the phone. Both were trapped in the same unconsciousness, just in different forms. This realization is liberating and humbling at the same time. You're not above anyone. You're not more special because you're awakening. You're simply at a different point in the same journey that everyone is taking. And that journey has no finish line where you can finally look at others and say, I made it and you didn't. Now, after everything I've shared with you, I need to pause for a moment. If this content touched something within you, if you felt recognition in these words, if tears welled up, or if a weight lifted from your chest, that's not a coincidence. You found this video because something within you already knew what would be revealed here. This kind of content, about Eckhart Tolle, about spiritual awakening, about the pains that no one talks about, takes hours of research, of study, of reflection to create. And I keep doing it because I know there's someone out there, maybe you, who needs to hear exactly this at this moment in their life. When you click the Super Thanks button, you're not just supporting a channel. You're positioning yourself as someone who values this kind of depth in a world of superficial content. You're saying, this matters, this awakening matters, this pain has meaning. If this resonated with you, consider this small gesture of mutual recognition. So, you've heard about the 5 pains: existential loneliness, hypersensitivity, spiritual disillusionment, the dark night of the soul, and the pain of seeing unconsciousness in others. But knowing the pains isn't enough. What do you do with them? How do you transform this suffering into awakening? Tolle offers a surprisingly simple path, although it's not easy. The first step is to stop resisting. Our whole lives, we've been conditioned to run from pain, to medicate it, to distract ourselves from it. But resistance is what transforms pain into suffering. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is pain multiplied by resistance. When you stop fighting what you're feeling, something extraordinary happens. The energy that was being used to resist releases itself, and often the intensity of the pain naturally diminishes. The second step is to observe without identification. You are not your emotions. You are not your thoughts. You are the consciousness in which emotions and thoughts appear. When loneliness arises, you can observe, interesting. Loneliness is present now. When hypersensitivity overwhelms you, you notice a lot of emotional energy in this moment. When disillusionment appears, you recognize the ego is losing its structures. This observation creates a space, and in that space, something beyond the mind can emerge. Andrew Huberman, for example, often talks about the importance of creating mental space to process emotions effectively. The third step is to find the present. Tolle teaches that all suffering exists in time, in the memory of the past, or in the anticipation of the future, in the real present moment, not in the concept of the present moment, but in the direct experience of the now. There is no suffering. There might be physical pain. There might be discomfort. But the kind of suffering that the mind creates, the story of victimization, the fear of what might happen, the guilt over what has happened, that only exists when you're not truly present. The practice is simple. Right now, as you listen to these words, can you perceive your breath? Can you feel the life in your body? Can you hear the silence behind the sounds? In that moment of perception, you are present, and in that moment, where is the suffering? It may still be there as a sensation, but it's lost its power to completely dominate you. The fourth step is to accept your humanity. Many spiritual seekers fall into the trap of trying to transcend the human experience prematurely. They want to skip the pain and go straight to enlightenment, but Tolle reminds us that we are having a human experience for a reason. The pains of awakening are not obstacles to consciousness, they are portals. Loneliness teaches you about the nature of true connection. Hypersensitivity shows you the interconnectedness of all life. Disillusionment frees you from false identities. The dark night destroys what needs to be destroyed so that something new can be born. Seeing unconsciousness in others teaches you compassion. Each of these pains carries a wisdom, and you can only access that wisdom by going through them, not around them. There's a fifth step that Tolle rarely mentions explicitly, but it's implied in all of his teachings. Cultivate radical patience. Awakening doesn't happen all at once. It's not like flipping a switch. It's more like dawn, gradual, almost imperceptible moment to moment, but inevitable if you keep looking. And during that process, there will be days when you feel like you're regressing, days when the ego will seem stronger than ever. Days when the pain will be so intense that you'll question whether this whole spiritual path isn't just a sophisticated illusion. In those moments, patience is everything. Not the passive patience of someone waiting for something to happen, but the active patience of someone who knows that every moment of darkness is serving a larger purpose. Tolle went through 2 years of intense depression before his awakening. 2 years. Imagine the patience required to keep existing when nothing makes sense, when every thought is a torture, when the future seems completely empty. But it was exactly that prolonged darkness that prepared the ground for his transformation. If he had given up, if he had found some distraction that temporarily relieved the pain, he might never have reached the breaking point necessary for awakening. Patience isn't just waiting. It's trusting the process, even when the process seems to be destroying you. Carl Jung often spoke of the necessity of confronting the shadow self, the darker aspects of our psyche, as a crucial part of individuation, a process that also demands immense patience and self-compassion. Going back to what I mentioned at the beginning about the collective pain body, There's an even deeper dimension of these 5 pains that I need to share. When you go through them consciously, you're not just healing yourself. You're contributing to the healing of humanity as a whole. Tolle explains that every person who awakens slightly diminishes the density of the collective pain body. You become a point of light in the darkness, and that light, however small it may seem, has an effect that goes far beyond what you can imagine. That's why your awakening matters, not just to you, but to everyone. Every moment of presence that you cultivate, every time you observe an emotion instead of reacting automatically, every instant of peace that you find in the middle of the chaos. You're doing something for the whole world. If you've made it this far, if you've heard these words and felt that they spoke directly to you, then you're already not the same person who started this video. Something has changed. It might be subtle, it might be almost imperceptible, but it's there. A small opening, a moment of recognition. A feeling of not being alone on this journey. I want to hear from you. Of the 5 pains I mentioned, which one are you experiencing most intensely right now? Comment down below. No need for long explanations. It can be a single word: loneliness, sensitivity, disillusionment, dark night, seeing unconsciousness. I read every comment. And when you share, you're not just venting, you're creating a space for others who are going through the same thing. You're showing that we're not alone in this strange journey of waking up in a sleeping world. The pain of awakening is real, but that's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. Every tear you finally allow to fall, every illusion that crumbles, every moment of existential loneliness you push through without running is preparing you for something words can't describe. A peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a presence that remains, even in the midst of chaos. A connection to life that goes far beyond what any human relationship can offer. You're on the path, and sometimes the path hurts. But the pain is transforming you, and one day, not too far from now, you'll look back and be grateful for every moment of darkness, because it was in the darkness that you found the light that was always inside you. Eckhart Tolle concludes one of his most profound teachings with an observation I want to leave you with. He says that suffering has a noble purpose, the evolution of consciousness and the burning away of the ego. Carl Jung touched on similar themes when he spoke about individuation, the process of becoming a whole person through integrating the shadow self. Andrew Huberman, from a neuroscience perspective, might add that facing discomfort triggers neuroplasticity, rewiring your brain for resilience. When you understand this, when you really internalize that your pain isn't meaningless, something shifts. The pain doesn't magically disappear, but you stop adding suffering to the suffering. You stop resisting what is. And in that radical acceptance, paradoxically, peace begins to emerge. Not the peace of escape, not the peace of denial, but the peace that comes from being completely present with what is, even when what is hurts. That's the peace that no one can take from you. That's the freedom that the awakening offers. And you are closer to it than you think.